Alright, welcome back. In this video, we are going to check out the third-person controller that is included with Unity. Now, this controller is pretty easy to use. However, if you have been changing around the cameras in your scene, there is a little bit of setup involved.
Right. If you've been following along with us up to this point, and you've been going through all the last videos where we've been creating and destroying cameras like crazy. So you probably no longer have the main camera that came in when you first created your project.
That's right. And in a nutshell, if you still have your main camera, you can drag and drop the third-person controller and it'll work just fine. If you don't have the main camera, you need to make one. And here's how you go about doing that. First, in the hierarchy panel, I'll go under Create and make a camera. Now, the name of this camera is completely irrelevant. As a matter of fact, just for sake of example, I'm going to call this Gooseball. I don't know. Well, it's just a random name.
Obviously, jeez. That's really random.
Yeah, Gooseball is awesome. Now, the important thing is that we tag this camera as the main camera. So up here in the inspector, underneath tag, we're going to set this to main camera.
Right. In a previous video, we talked about tags having uses, but not really something that you would notice unless you got involved with scripting.
Unfortunately, the third-person controller makes some pretty heavy use of scripting and is looking for the tag for the main camera. So let's go under the standard assets, under character controllers, and here is our third-person controller. I'm just going to drag and drop him into the level. And when he comes in, he's kind of halfway through the ground, so we're going to pull him up into the air, like so. And since we have our main camera tagged in the screen, we can now hit play, and everything seems to work. Now, before we even really get into this controller, I'm going to do this. We're going to stop, and we're going to untag our camera. So let's take Gooseball here, and we'll just untag it, and then hit play. And we get a null reference exception, and we're way out here in space.
You may or may not see the character. If you do, he may be running in place.
He probably will be.
Right. And these are things that can show up in as an anomaly. And if you don't know what's going on, it could confuse you. And that's why we want to show you what's going on.
That's right. So make sure you have a camera. Make sure that camera is tagged as the main camera, no matter what you name it. Though it's probably a good idea, to go ahead
Not to leave it as Gooseball.
Yeah, let's go ahead and name it main camera.
It's just an indication that, the main camera named in the hierarchy is the one that you're actually tagged as your main camera.
That's right. So now let's hit play, and let's take a quick look at what we have here. We have, of course, a third-person camera where we can actually take a look at the character as they move around. We have W, A, S, and D controls. Now, what A and D are doing is they start off walking us in a new direction, but then they also turn the characters. So here I'm holding down the A key, and that's turning us to the left while we walk. And then I can hold down the D key, and that turns us in the opposite direction while we walk.
Right. It's almost like you're walking around a circle where you left your camera. And
That's
the
right.
camera is just turning to follow you as you walk around in a big circle.
Now, you can do the same thing with the arrow keys if it suits you, but same behavior. Now, if we hold down the Shift key, we can go into a run. If we walk in a single direction and we don't stop, it's hard to see on the video, I know, because we're only capturing at 10 frames a second. But after a couple of seconds, we speed up a little bit.
Right.
We go from a walking speed into a trotting speed. A couple of other things as well. If we turn the character around and just kind of stop moving for a moment, the camera zips back behind the character.
Right. It actually wants to always be behind the character. So the moment you stop turning, the camera's going to seek the position that is behind the character.
That's right. And if I hold down the Alt key while that's happening, that transition takes place much more quickly, which is called camera snapping. So that, in a nutshell, well, aside from tapping spacebar to jump the camera,
are the controls for this character
That's
controller.
right. Those are all of the controls. Now let's take a look at the various properties that come along with the third-person controller. I'll go ahead and click on this guy, and the first one we have is something that was also present in the first-person controller, excuse me.
Correct. This is the character controller that is actually a component that is built into Unity. This controller, or this component, is not a rigid body.
Right, but it is a physics controller.
Right.
Or a physics component, excuse me.
It does look for other colliders, it looks for the terrain, and it tries to keep the character above the ground and prevent you from walking through another collider, but it does not react to gravity per se like another rigid body does. It's handled in scripting to make this particular character fall back down to the ground.
Well, you can actually see what the character controller is doing here. It's defining the shape of a capsule. It's defining its height and its radius. And in this case, the height is 1.832 and some odd change meters, which is about 6 feet tall.
Yep.
Now we have a radius as well. So this is a cylindrical style radius around which kind of a distance from the center of the character where we would detect collisions. We have the slope limit. Anything higher than this limit, anything steeper than this, we can't climb up. So we're limited to 45 degrees at most. Anything tighter than 45 degrees or anything steeper than that, we can't climb it.
Right. The step offset is actually an offset of how high this character can go to climb over an obstacle or another collider without being stopped by that collider.
That's right. And then we have our skin width. This is how deep into our radius an object can go before we start to detect a collision. Then we have our min move distance. This is the minimum amount of distance that must be achieved before we start to move the character.
Right.
So like if we hit a direction with the keyboard, like we hit forward, we must move at least this much, otherwise the character will not move at all. And it's currently set to 0, so we're always going to be moving the character.
Right. Now the center is a way to fine-tune the location of the capsule in relation to your character.
That's right.
You can actually move it up and Y to align the feet so they touch the ground the way you expect them to. If your character is slightly forward or backwards, you can use X and Z to make sure that the capsule aligns with the center of your character.
Right. Now down from here we have the third-person controller. This is a script. It has several different properties, and at a glance it can look a little bit more intimidating than the first-person controller, but really it's very, very simple. The first 4 properties we have are really just some animation cycles that were created inside of a third-party animation software such as Maya or 3ds Max.
Right. They're actually animations on a skeleton that is used to control the character's skin.
Right, so we have an idle for when the character is just standing there. We have a walk, a run, and a jump. And that's really all we need. Now, the next several properties are all interrelated with each other. We have walk, max animation speed, trot, max animation speed, also the same for run, jump, and land. What these are doing is controlling the rate of playback for all of these animations.
Right. And they work in tandem with the next couple of entries, the walk speed, the trot speed, the run speed. These are used to tune against one another to make sure that the feet in your animation when you're walking or running look like they're actually coming in contact with the ground, so they're not sliding along the surface.
That's right, and the workflow for this would simply be to set whatever speed you wanted the character to walk, trot, or run at, and then fine-tune your animation speed to correspond. For instance, if we hit play, and let's say we aim our character kind of down the ravine like so, and I take the walk speed, actually let's do trot speed, because he will eventually accelerate into a trot anyway, and let's set this up to something ridiculous, like 30. Now, when we start playing, after a couple seconds, he'll speed up, but notice his feet aren't moving any faster. So let's do that one more time as he starts to walk forward. He's still more or less walking at the same speed. I realize it's kind of hard to see.
Right. And it's pretty
but
much
it's like he's skating.
Yeah, it's an extreme example. No matter how much you were to ramp up the trot max animation speed, it's going to look really crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm going to pull it down to 10 so it's not quite so crazy.
Right.
And here you go. It looks like he's sliding across the ground.
Right. Now, if you were to actually take the trot max animation speed and bump that up to, say, about 5.
Oh, okay, we can do 5.
And then try it again.
Got to give it a couple seconds to go into our trot.
You'll see his feet are moving a whole lot faster, but they're not looking. It doesn't look like they're sliding as much.
Right. Now, again, at this point, you'd actually want to create a new kind of animation because people don't tend to move like this. But that's the whole idea here, is that you're taking the existing animation and you're speeding it up and or slowing it down until you get something that tweaks out for the speed that you want the character to move. Which is why when you look at the playback speeds that we have listed here, you see some values that are a little bit adjusted. We see like 0.9, 1.15. You're not seeing direct values of like 0.
Right.
Excuse
they're
me.
just they're numbers that were dialed in by Unity when they created this particular prefab based on the animation that they had and how much they wanted that character to move. So it was probably a bit of trial and error going back and forth to figure out what looked good, and that's how they came up with those numbers.
Now let's take a look at some of these other properties. We have in-air control acceleration. This is how quickly you can change direction, or how much acceleration you have to move the character while he's falling. So if you're in free fall, you jump off of a really tall cliff and you hold, say, forward, this is the rate of acceleration you're going to start to move forward. It's how much jump control you have. And you've seen this in a lot of video games, I'm sure. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're a gamer, at least on some level, and you've played those games where, if you jump off something, sometimes you have control when you fall, but it's usually very soft. It doesn't feel just like it does when you're on the ground. It's kind of slowed down a little bit, and that's what this controls. Now, down from here, we have the jump height. This is a very straightforward property. This controls how high we go up into the air. As a matter of fact, if I hit play, we can take our jump height. Now, let's do a couple of things here. Let's set this to 100 units.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hit jump. We'll probably fly out of the camera.
Do you want to adjust the height or the camera height lag?
Well, I probably should have. Because the camera really didn't like doing anything I just did.
Right.
Let's go ahead and stop.
Now, what's happening is there's a parameter in the third-person camera script that is a lag for height, smooth lag. This is actually a number that is controlling how much the camera is going to lag behind the character when the character is changing altitude.
That's right. They're trying to make it to where it doesn't look like the camera is locked right onto the character's shoulders.
Right.
They want a little bit of lag to make it feel a little bit more natural. Like there is some hand, some force of some kind that is trying to make sure the character stays in the camera, but it's not perfect.
Right, and when you take your jump height and you set it at 100, that's a little bit more than the designers had intended.
Right, so we break stuff. So what I'm going to do instead is take my jump height, and instead of cranking it up to 100, let's just pull it up to something like 10. Okay, so I went a little bit over the top. That's okay. And let's just hit jump, and there we go. Now we are still getting a little bit of snap there because we are, still jumping pretty high up into the air. But at least it does show what the jump height can do. Incidentally, we're also showing that height smooth lag because at 0, you'll notice when we fall, we're sticking right with the character.
Yep. And we're actually showing one other thing that I like to cover at this point so we don't have to come back to it later, and that's the clamp head position screen space. If you watch carefully when Zach jumps the character, the camera doesn't keep the character centered on the screen. It actually has the character moving up first, almost up to the top of the screen, and then the camera snaps to try to follow it. That is what this clamp head position screen space is doing. It's a threshold of how far the character is going to move before the camera tries to correct and keep the character from going off the top of the screen.
Right, which is why we kind of look up first, and then we actually kind of snap to catch up real quick. Now, I'm going to get away from the third-person camera, and let's go ahead and let's stop our playback, because we'll be coming to this here in just a moment. I'll put this back at its default value of 0.3, and let's come back up here to jump height. So again, that's a really straightforward property. It's how high up in the air you jump. You just have to be careful with it because the camera is not designed to handle really high jumps, not without some considerable tweaking. Now, down from here we have gravity. How fast do you want to be able to fall? This is faster than a natural gravity of 9.7 meters per second. What was it? 9.8.
9.81.
9.8.
Yep. Yeah,
9.81 meters per. What at 4 in the morning, I can't remember the speed of gravity, but it doesn't matter. By default, this is set to 20.
Right.
If you want your character to move faster, increase it. If you want him to move slower when he falls, decrease it. Very simple. Speed smoothing is a rate of transition in between the 3 speeds at which the character moves, being walk, trot, and run.
Well, and also idle.
And also idle, so meaning if you let go of your button while you're moving, it's how quickly he's going to transition back to no speed whatsoever. Now, setting this to 0 is not particularly useful, but if we set it to something like 1 and play back, we get a really slow acceleration, and he's steadily going faster and faster and faster, slowly working his way up to a trot. If I hold down Shift, He's technically running, but he's also, gradually accelerating into that run. If I let off, notice he's going to drift for quite a while. And that is what that speed smoothing is going to control. Now again, by default, that's set to 10. If you need that transition to go more quickly, increase this value. If you want a little bit more drift time, then simply decrease it. Rotate speed controls how quickly the character turns while he's moving around. Now, the number doesn't correspond to any rotation amount that I could associate with anything in the real world.
Right. It's more of a dial-in or feel type of number.
Right, but with its default value of 500, if I start walking forward and I hold down the A key, this is how quickly we turn. That's all there is to it. If I was to lower this down to a value, let's say 10% of that value, down to 50, and we do this again, he is turning, but he's turning much more slowly. So again, you're just controlling that rate of turn. So we'll go ahead and stop, which will put that back up to its default value of 500. Next, we have trot after seconds. As we mentioned a little while ago, if you just start walking in a direction, after a couple of seconds, he'll go from a walk into a trot, and this controls the time interval at which that'll happen. If you want him to just go straight into a trot, set this at 0. He won't walk. He'll just go right into a trot when you hit forward. Next, we have can jump. I don't think the properties get much easier than that. Do you want the character to be able to jump? Yes. Make sure this is checked. No. Uncheck this and go on about your day. Now, that wraps up all of the properties for the third-person controller script. Now let's take a look at the third-person camera script. The first one of these we have is the camera transform, and this is looking for an association to a camera, but you'll notice we haven't associated anything with it.
Right. What's happening on the script side is it's looking for a camera that's been tagged with the main camera tag. So we don't actually have to put anything in there. When we hit run, it will automatically fill in that property.
And you can see that right here. It's just plugged in the main camera because it's coded to do that based on that main camera tag that we set earlier in the inspector. Now down from here we have some pretty obvious stuff. The distance, that's going to be the camera distance. If I increase that to 5, we're further away. If I pull that down to, say, 2, we're a whole lot closer. This is just something you can dial into something that works for you. Oh, by the way, 0 looks really scary. I just thought I'd point that out. Now next we have height. How high up in the air are we? Are we 5 meters up in the air? Are we 20 meters up in the air? So you could do something kind of like a top-down camera, though I'm not sure how well that would work. We'll set it back to its default of 1.
Now, these next couple of parameters work on how fast the camera moves back to being positioned behind the character. We have 2 different types that we explained earlier. We have the normal mode, which is if you start walking and you just stop walking, the camera will slowly swing behind it. But if you hold Alt down, it will snap into position. The angular smooth lag is how much smoothing is applied. The angular max speed is how fast that camera will get moving once it starts moving.
That's right. So let's change the angular max speed for just a moment. Let's set this up to something like 1,000. And now if we walk the player backwards, it just flips right around. Now normally you wouldn't want that because you have snapping, which if you hold down Alt it should be faster, but now Alt actually slows it down because the angular speed is so quick.
Right.
So we'll set that back over to 175. In fact, I think if I just hit stop, it'll go back to where it was.
Right. And the snap smooth lag and the snap max speed are the same thing, but only take place when you're holding Alt down.
Right. So it's kind of like you have an acceleration rate, and then you have a speed limit, if you want to look at it that way.
Right.
We have our height smooth lag. This is how quickly the elevation of the camera will change to keep up with the player. So if you walk your character off a cliff, he will tend to fall off the camera because it takes a moment for the camera to catch up.
Right. Now, we've already discussed the clamp head position. That's basically how far the character can move before the camera will snap to try to keep him on the screen.
That's right. It's like if he makes it to 75% up toward the top in screen space, the camera's going to go into kind of an emergency mode and make sure he stays in the camera.
Right. Now, the lock camera timeout is another interesting timer. It's basically how long the camera will stop before it starts to swing back behind the character.
And right now it's set to 0.2 of a second. So if we do something like set this to let's go something like 2 full seconds and turn him around. We hold for 2 seconds and then we rotate around. So again, it's just how long we're actually going to hold before we decide to rotate back around the character. And, you know, in some games, I've seen some where, you know, that's actually a pretty long time, especially the real true 3D feeling platformers where you can run the character in any direction you like. Some of them will sit there and hold at the character staring at the front of them for a moment, and then if you sit still long enough, they'll slide back around to the back. And you can fine-tune that here. So that is a look at all of the controls for the third-person controller that is included with Unity. But we don't want you to think that you're limited to just using controllers like this.
Right. If you look at these controllers, both the first person and the third person, they're provided by Unity for you to get started with. These controllers are basically for you to create your first couple of levels, put something in so you can play around quickly without having to delve into a lot of scripting. These controllers are by no means production quality or production ready. You're not going to want to build a game, put this in it, and then try to sell it. They're not that high quality.
And well, I mean, even if they were, they can't be. They're not the kind of thing you would think of as being the jack of all trades. They're not the be all end all. Surely, when you're starting to design your own games, you will come up with one or two more things you want your character to do that aren't covered by this script. But these are a nice place to start, and you can open the scripts up, and they are pretty well commented to help you see exactly how the developers came up with their solutions.
Right. They do have this. The scripts are freely available to you, and it's a good place to start to see how this is done, and then you can start dissecting them and take some of the techniques that are in there and develop them into your own controllers.
However, we don't want you to think that you have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
We don't want you to think that you have to study the third-person controller developed by Unity to figure out how to make a decent third-person controller.
Yeah, I kind of did a lot of research, starting with theirs and a bit more. And one of the things that we developed for 3D Buzz is a video series on how to build your own character controller system, as well as a third-person camera system to go along with it.
So I think it's time for a shameless plug.
Do you want to play?
I want to play. So we've already seen this third-person controller. So now let's take a look at another third-person controller. And the exciting part is what I'm about to show you is a third-person controller that was developed by 3D Buzz that is covered in a training video set.
Yep.
Now, at the time of this recording, it is an upcoming training video set. But depending on when you're watching this, it could already be available. So let's see here. What am I going to do? Let's take our existing third-person controller and hit the big red destruction button. Just delete it. And then the main camera will delete that too. Now, how are we going to get this in here, Lee?
Well, I made it as a package for you.
Okay. So
I know you haven't had a chance to play with it. Oh, well, other than when I was playing with it, but you haven't put it into your own game yet.
All right. Well, I'll do import package.
Yeah.
Where's it hiding?
It's in the U drive.
Hurry up. I'm excited.
Come on, it's in the source assets.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's a 3D Buzz third-person setup.
Third-person setup. Let's bring it in.
So this is a package like we showed you how to create before. There's quite a bit of assets that go along with it.
I don't care. Import. Just go. Come on, compile. Go, 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 go. Come on. Oh, it's taking too long. I'm so excited. Hurry up. Oh, that was good. Do that again. Just be finished. There we go. All right, awesome. And at the top, we have 3D Buzz third-person setup. Underneath this, we see our character. Now, let's see if it's just as easy to use as the other one. Let's just drag and drop. Thump. Awesome. Now, I don't even have a main camera in here. Is that going to be a problem?
Nope.
All right, well, let's just hit play, see what we get. Oh, and she's...
Slide friction. We need to adjust that one.
Okay, so we come over here, the TP motor.
Yeah, drop that down to about 0.6.
Okay, 0.6.
Give that a shot. There you go.
Awesome. So now we have our third-person controller. Now I'm hitting A and D, and that's just strafing. Now this particular controller doesn't have diagonal strafing, but I mean you could add it in.
Right.
And by the time you get done with our videos, you'll know how to add it in. But this does have mouse control. So as I run, I can hold down the right mouse button and aim the character exactly where I want her to go.
Yep.
Now, she can do some other things that aren't really supported in our level. She can climb as well.
Right. She can jump.
Yeah, but she can jump.
Now, take her Y position and crank it up to about 50.
50?
Yeah, you seem to like dropping characters.
What? And she stays right in the view.
Yep.
Do it again. Thump.
Now, another thing that you can do with her is run her up near the tent where the collider is on your tent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, with the other controller, if you move the camera, it would go through there. Try that with this camera.
Oh, check it out. The camera's actually bumping into the collider, and it's accommodating for it. And we also have mouse wheel control. It felt like we had mouse wheel control.
Yep.
Yep, we do. So we can roll forward, and we can roll back to slide in and out. Very, very cool. So we do have some videos that can help you create your own third-person controller, if you would like to. So, and that's just another series of videos that we have here from 3D Buzz, leading up to it's kind of like our upcoming magnum opus for Unity training, which is the MMO training course, which we're going to be making available to member sponsors of 3D Buzz. Very limited seating, and something that you can only get access to if you are a member sponsor. It's going to go into a lot of really deep topics over developing your own MMO with Unity, but that's just another shameless plug. So I think at this point we have talked about enough. We started off innocently showing you how to set up the included third-person controller, and then of course we took that and ran into bringing into a custom third-person controller. After explaining all of the properties of the one that's included, so we were good. And then once we were finished with our business, we went into play mode and showed you this third-person controller, which again, if you're interested in learning how to make this, we have those videos available to you. But I think that's going to wrap things up for this video. I think it is time for us to call it for a little while.
All right.
So thank you all for watching, and we will catch you on the next video.